Okay, thank you very much for that, Mark. I'll just go back one slide. You can see today the agenda of the presentation, as Mark's already mentioned. We'll be talking firstly about barnyard grass ecology, so just exploring why it has become such a problematic weed of zero-till systems. We'll be looking into a little bit more about some of its ecological aspects and why some agronomic aspects are effective in managing this weed. I'll then touch on the current resistance status of this weed, and then I'll hand it over to Tony Cook, who will talk about management aspects. So most of you would be aware that there are two species of barnyard grass that are common in the northern region. There is barnyard grass, which is Echinocloa cruzgali, and then there's awnless barnyard grass, which is Echinocloa colonna. The one we're going to be focusing on this morning is awnless barnyard grass. We're focusing on that one because it is much more common in our cropping system. We do get Echinocloa cruzgali in crop, but it is much less common. The other reason we're focusing on awnless barnyard grass, that's the species that is most troublesome. As I'll discuss later, there are many populations that have resistance to different herbicides. You can see there on your screen, the Northern Grower Alliance did a survey of agronomists in 2013, and this was all about awnless barnyard grass. One of the questions they asked was about the frequency in fallow paddocks, and so you can see there a pie chart. You've got well over 90% of people responding that they do have barnyard grass in the paddocks that they consult on. And you can see there the largest percentage, so over 50%, had awnless barnyard grass in more than 50% of the paddocks for which they consult. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the ecology of awnless barnyard grass, but before I go on to that, I wanted to firstly touch on some of the characteristics that help you distinguish between awnless barnyard grass and barnyard grass. You might think that one of the main characteristics is whether there's awns present or not, but that's probably not the best way to distinguish between the two species. Awnless barnyard grass characteristically has purple striping on its leaves, so it's similar to, I guess, a stripe that's on a zebra, and it's purple in nature. So that's one of the distinguishing factors. However, that purple stripe is not always present. Commonly, that will be present on a plant that's in fallow. However, if it's a plant that's in crop, sometimes that purple striping isn't there. The other characteristic that helps you distinguish between the two species is that awnless barnyard grass is definitely not as robust a plant as barnyard grass. In a fallow situation, it begins to grow a bit more prostrate than barnyard grass. And also its stems are much more fine. Now, barnyard grass, so Echinocloa cruzgali, is commonly found in your non-cropping areas as well, so around the paddock, and it can grow up to at least 1.5 metres in height under a favourable environment, whereas awnless barnyard grass, which is the one we're talking about today, I've never seen a plant grow much beyond about 50 centimetres. Okay, so back on to awnless barnyard grass. As with many of the weeds that we're targeting in the northern region, it is a prolific seed producer. So one individual plant can produce in excess of 40,000 viable seeds. So straight away, looking at this weed, one of the things we need to target when we're wanting to manage it is stopping seed set. Now, the seed that is set in any one season, for example, we'd have barnyard grass out in the paddock now. Some of that is already setting seed. That seed, once it is set, does have dormancy, which means you will not get germination of that seed in this season. However, if you let a plant seed, that seed goes into the soil. If there's favourable environment come spring next year, you will get a flush of emergence. Now, one of the things which is quite common with awnless barnyard grass is that it is readily spread by floodwater and also by irrigation. I was just out at a property yesterday out on the Eastern Downs where they've got an incursion of both awnless barnyard grass and barnyard grass that has come in by flood water. You can see down the bottom there we've got a graph which is exploring seed set on awnless barnyard grass as influenced by crop competition. In this case, we're looking here at seed production per square metre under different planting configurations of sorghum. So the bar on the left is looking at solid 1 metre planting of sorghum, and then the bar on the right is the least competitive where it's looking at double skip. Straight away here you can see that crop competition impacts greatly the seed production on awnless barnyard grass. So the more competitive a crop, the less seed is produced per square metre. Now in terms of germination and establishment of this weed, it really can establish across a wide range of soil types. I've seen it across all different soil types. It's probably a bit more common on our heavier soils. Now, another thing which makes it quite difficult to manage is that you can get multiple cohorts or emergences of this weed each season. It's not uncommon to have from 5 to 7 flushes of germination of this weed in a season. That is in part because it is able to germinate over a reasonably wide range of temperatures. Now we've got there what the ideal soil temperature is, but you can get emergence of this weed in early spring up to even late autumn. I've seen flushes of emergence. Now when that emergence occurs and in what magnitude it occurs is really dependent upon how much rainfall is received. So there is a requirement for at least 10 millimetres of rainfall, and I've generally found that the size of that germination is based upon how much rain is received. So we've got there as a dot point that the first germination in spring is typically the largest. That can be the case. However, if in early spring you're not getting a large amount of rainfall, those first flushes can be quite small, and then once we get decent rain, that flush will probably be the greatest. Now, awnless barnyard grass emergence is favoured by seed that are in the surface layers of the soil. So we've got a little bit of data there that shows that seed placed at the 0 to 2 centimetre depth, you get quite a bit of germination, and the deeper you get, the less germination you get. Now, 10 centimetres there, we've got less than 1% emerging. I'd actually suggest that it's probably generally much less than that. Very rarely would you get emergence from 10 centimetre depth. You do get a little bit from 5 centimetre, but most of it is in the top 2 centimetres of soil. So that has implications. Sorry, I'll just go back. That has implications then. If you have cultivation in your system, that is going to distribute your soil within the soil seed bank. So it's going to be at varying depths. If you're in a zero-till system where you're not burying that soil through mechanical means, most of your seed will remain on the soil surface. So we predominantly have moved towards zero-till or reduced tillage systems, which means most of our seed is on or close to the soil surface. So you can see then that the environment we're creating, you've got the seed close to the soil surface, is ideal for weeds such as awnless barnyard grass. However, you think about some of our other weed species like fleabane, common sow thistle, it's the exact same situation. They actually have smaller seeds, so they definitely prefer to be on the soil surface. So moving on to persistence. The seeds of awnless barnyard grass are fairly short-lived on the soil surface. If I can just look down at that table on this graph, and if you just look at this first column where we're looking at persistence of the percentage of seeds sown after 12 months, let me go back, sorry. When seed is within that top 2 centimetres of soil, after 12 months, there's really only about 13% of that seed remaining viable. If you contrast that, however, to when seed is buried at 10 centimetres, 40% of that is still viable after 12 months. So you can see that the depth of seed burial has a huge impact on how long that seed will persist. If you go down to then the last column, 48 months, which is quite a period of time, on the surface, a very small percentage of seed remains viable. So we've got there less than 0.1%. You might look at that figure and think, well, that's hardly anything. That could be the case. However, if you start with a very large seed bank, so let's say it was 500,000 seeds per square metre, which is not uncommon, you would still have a large number of seeds present after 48 months. So even after 48 months, the key would still be stop seed set on any individuals that come up. Now, the implication here, again, linking it back to tillage, if you're coming in and you're tilling and you know that you've got hornless barnyard grass seeds in your seed bank, so you've probably had maybe a blowout the previous season, or you've just had a few individual set seeds, the quandary is, do I cultivate or don't I cultivate? And that really comes back to the individual. However, in a system where you leave cultivation out, most of that seed will be on the soil surface, therefore they will not persist for as long. As soon as you introduce cultivation, what you'll do is you'll bury some of that seed, not all of it, but you'll bury some of that to a depth, firstly, where it cannot germinate. So you might find that you have a reduced population or a reduced flush of emergence next season. However, what you've done is you've buried seed to a position where it will persist for much longer. So after a one-off cultivation, for example, if you come back and cultivate again, what you will in effect do is bring some of that buried seed, which is persisting, so it's still viable, you'll bring that back to the soil surface, and when the environment's right, you will get a flush of emergence. So on one hand, zero till, you're able to get on top of the problem rather quickly if you stop seed set. If you introduce cultivation, the problem may be that you actually prolong the weed problem. Okay, so moving on now to glyphosate resistance. Hornless barnyard grass has been confirmed as resistant to our Group C herbicides, such as atrazine. That resistance is not terribly widespread. Now, more recently, and probably of greater concern, is the confirmed resistance to glyphosate, so our Group M herbicides. Up until now, so since 2007, there's about 100 populations are confirmed as resistant to glyphosate, which means this product is now no longer effective on those populations. And the resistances differ in terms of how resistant these individuals are, but we do have individuals that have up to 7-fold resistance, which means you need 7 times the upper label recommended rate to effectively control those populations. We are still doing some testing within the northern region. As Mark mentioned, you'll be getting some feedback forms and some information at the end of this webinar. We'll be giving you some details for Greg Brook, who's collecting and testing samples of hornless barnyard grass, along with details of how those samples should be taken and submitted. Okay, so from a resistance survey that was conducted in conjunction with NGA in 2012, if you look at the map here, it's a map of the northern region, and you can see there we've got yellow boxes with numbers in. Those boxes represent the number of hornless barnyard grass samples that were confirmed as glyphosate resistant. And you can see there that the hot spot really is from around Gundawindi down to Narrabri. But you can see that the resistant populations are spread throughout most of the northern grain region. Now, if you look quickly here at the graph over on the side, what we did is we did 2 lots of testing. One here, which is the first bar, was targeting paddocks where there were hornless barnyard grass survivors. The second one here is random fallow paddocks where there was hornless barnyard grass present, not necessarily survivors of a glyphosate treatment. And just quickly pointing out here, the first bar, those that survived, very few of them were confirmed as susceptible. Up to nearly 80% of them were confirmed as having glyphosate resistance. So in a paddock, if you do have survivors of a glyphosate treatment, more than likely they do have resistance. But the only way to confirm that is to get it tested. If we look here at the random collection, and this is quite worrying, we have over 40% of those that were collected were indeed glyphosate resistant. So one of the big challenges that we do have with this weed. Okay, so I've just got 2 more slides left here. One of the keys to managing this weed is firstly targeting small weeds, and Tony will talk about the different management strategies. Ornless barnyard grass stresses very quickly. Now with the summer that we've had, for example, in the northern region, we've had hot, dry conditions up until this last week. These ornless barnyard grass will be very, very stressed, very difficult to control with glyphosate. So really, a double knock is required to obtain close to or 100% control of ornless barnyard grass. Just quickly looking here at the graph below, this is when we're trying to control glyphosate-susceptible ornless barnyard grass. Really what we're looking at here is we've got 2 products. So we've got glyphosate and we've got paraquat. And it's really just comparing the impact of weed size and herbicide rate. So the basic principle here is as your weed size increases, your herbicide efficacy decreases. As you increase your herbicide rate, you do get an increase in control. So there's nothing new here. But importantly, you can see here generally we're not achieving 100% control with our single knock treatments. Hence the reason double knock is really controlled to stop seed set. Is needed to stop seed set. So just one more slide before I hand it over to Tony. Now this here is looking at a comparison of glyphosate susceptible and glyphosate resistant ornless barnyard grass. So in the green bar there is the control we're achieving on our resistant populations. So one of the things you can see, firstly, this is the glyphosate rate, so it's the active per hectare. It's quite low because this was in a greenhouse situation where the plants are soft. But you can see when we're applying a low rate of glyphosate, the weed age has a huge impact. When we're bumping then the rate up, even when we're applying to small plants, would have been at the early tillering stage, we're getting very poor control of our glyphosate-resistant plants. In contrast, we're able to get quite good efficacy on our glyphosate-susceptible individuals. So you can see there the impact of resistance status, timing of application, and also the rate of application. Okay, so with that, I will hand it now over to Tony Cook, who's going to talk.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks very much for that introduction on ecology. I'll try and link into what Michael's just mentioned. And oops, I'll go back one here. Anyway, issues we have with barnyard grass, and that does happen every once in a while, is in years where we have late spring, early summer rainfall, just prior to harvest, we have been getting the onset of summer weeds growing in winter crops. And that's problematic in for various reasons. And the only option there would be to double knock after the crop's off. Hopefully the plants haven't obtained a very large size, but that's the only option we could sort of recommend at this point in time, because the herbicides, as Michael just said, double knocking is quite robust for various reasons, and you're getting 2 modes of action. So looking at that, that happened a few years ago. This year it's probably not an issue whatsoever. Pardon me, not at all. So following the harvest, we go to in-fallow germinations. So getting rainfall events, as Michael said, that would trigger germinations, at least 10 mils, maybe more. Ideally, the best idea is still double knocking, if that's available to you. As Michael said, usually the first germination of weeds in the spring or summer is usually one of the most prolific, because the seeds have been sitting there with their dormancy being broken over the winter. Ideally, double knock suited to that situation. Be warned that I've done work before. You follow in, we try and target small weeds as possible. There's a tendency for people in the past to hang on and wait as long as possible to get as many weeds up and then do your double knocking. In this particular case, we rather prefer that within about 7 to 10 days after a rainfall event, all your seeds have germinated. They're probably at the 2-3 leaf stage, growing very rapidly, and that's perfectly suited to double knocking. The gap usually is about 5 or 7 days. A lot of people have researched this, and that gap, it does vary a little bit, but on the whole the consensus agreement is 5 to 7 days gap between the first knock, then followed by a paraquat application. So that's allowing enough time for the glyphosate to do a bit of a job on all the plants, even though the resistant ones may survive, but you don't wait too long and the paraquat will tidy up whatever survives. As I said, don't wait for secondary germinations. The second fall of rain might be a flood event and you might not ever get back on for a long period of time. People are also using Group A herbicides, and mainly those people are the types are dealing with Group A, glyphosate resistant weeds. Some people may be using that as a preventative option to combat Group M resistance before it occurs. The issue is with Group A, as we all know in industry, that they are and have been proven to develop resistance in other grass weeds very quickly. Within about 5 or 6 years, the first cases of resistance can occur without any other tactics imposed on that, and we don't see any reason why that would change in a fallow situation. At the moment, we've only got Group A registered via WeedSeeker, but there's a few herbicides out there for choosing, so it might not just be haloxaphop or verdict. There's a range of herbicides. We can look at that later. Highly effective, very good, but there is a risk associated with that. Okay, double knock applications. Double knock's been around for a fair while, developed over in the west a bit for other reasons, but we've adopted that over here to our suite of weeds. It is reasonably cheap because we're using cheap herbicides. The only issue is the time it takes to get over the land twice. Most importantly, we are dealing with small weeds generally, usually multiple weeds, multiple or high density weeds in some situations, with stubble loads, things that will intercept the spray before it actually hits the plant. So we have to set our boom up appropriately. We need to have the boom, check the nozzles. We also have to use, obviously, drift reduction technology as best we can, and unfortunately some of the herbicides we use actually like a finer coarse spectrum of droplet. But we stick to the guidelines, stick to a medium to a coarse nozzle or droplet spectrum. We're treating the young weeds. They're more susceptible when they're young, as Michael just alluded to earlier. If they get a bit of size and get a bit stressed, they do not respond to herbicide. It is almost like treating a weed with a sublethal dose. Stress weeds, as I said, that's one thing. We found resistance in many cases on the lighter soil types. It's developed there sometimes because of the fact that they've been treated more often than not on in situations where the plants are stressing earlier, and they've been getting effectively a sublethal dose for a lot longer, and that's usually what occurs with glyphosate resistance. So we have to get on there a lot earlier than what we used to in the past. Water rates are most important with the stubble loading and also just getting enough droplets over the target area. You'll see that picture on the right hand side there. You can see some very small weeds, and with the push to use a coarse droplet spectrum, we need to get more drops out there because some weeds may, just by chance, avoid some of those droplets, and we need to get more of those out to make sure that almost every single plant can get targeted. There you go. the 5 to 7 day interval has been mentioned before, and that gives you actually, which is a good idea, enough time to get over some of your problem paddocks. A lot of farms in the northern region at least are struggling to get over a fair proportion of their farms just due to the time it takes for double knocking. We've also done some preliminary research. We won't have enough time today to look at the incorporation of residuals in the double knock. And if we do get a wet year, they will certainly take a lot of pressure off the post-emergent chemistries and the consistent application of these post-emergent herbicides or knockdown herbicides when we have a wet year. And some of these pre-emergent herbicides, I'll go on later, can give pretty long-term residual control and save a fair bit of money. Here we go. Now we've got optical camera sprayers. Oops, a bit to go back. Here we go. Optical camera sprayers. They've been around for a fair while, from about the early 2000s. There were a bit of teething problems with these initially, and that was mainly attributed to calibration and setting up issues. They're not like a standard boom spray. But the important feature of these things, or the driving force of these this technology, is the cost savings, where we're predominantly applying post-emergent herbicides, and these devices clearly detect weeds. So we're not wasting a lot of money applying post-emergent herbicides to stubble and bare soil. Fortunately enough, in the last 2 or 3 years, we, courtesy of a few in the DPI and APVMA and Crop Optics, got a weed permit, the weed minor use permit, which is the second table, but only just very recently, in the last 12 months, New Farm have opted to get label registration, which is a much relief because it will be there for the long term. Permits seem to be temporary documents. You can see here that the herbicides out there, going through the options available, we have the standard paraquat-based products like Nuquat, Glyphosate, and Alliance, which is a mixture of amitrol and paraquat. But you can see there's very robust rates. They're good. I would not recommend trying to go for extremely high rates if you are just trying to combat a glyphosate-resistant weed, for example, a 7 litre rate per hectare. I do know some populations that will survive 7 litres per hectare. So I'd still use that more in a double knock strategy, where you're following up a fail or some survivors of an initial application. The weed seeker permit below, on the table below, suggests that we didn't go for such high rates. We shouldn't need to drown plants with active ingredient. It's more about rotating chemistries, and you've got a range of chemistries there that are applicable to barnyard grass, and we've still got glyphosate and paraquat, and we've then got a range of Group A herbicides, and this will cover not just barnyard grass but other grass weeds that may be impacting on your paddock if you have a mixed population. Most importantly, I definitely believe that the residuals are the driving force in the northern fallow systems in the next 5 or 10 years. We have had a obsession, I suppose you could call it, with post-emergent chemistries, but from an ecological point of view, to best target control of weeds starts at the emergence of the weeds, even before they get out of the ground. So residuals have a perfect fit there. We've got herbicides that are registered at the moment, and they're listed here, and you've got them from a range of different herbicide groups. You've got imazapyr, which is Group B, which is flame, metolachlor or dual gold, Group K, treflan or trifluorine, Group K with stomp, and also isoxaflutol, which is balance, which is Group H. So we've got a fair bit of mode of action rotation. They are perfect because they can fit in a range of different cropping systems. Imazapyr in particular has a moderate plant-back period for some crops, but very long periods for other crops. Dual gold or metolachlor is a fantastic herbicide, gives high levels of efficacy, and could be used in a range of crops. Same for trephland to that extent. The table down below shows the length of residual. This is a trial by the Northern Grower Alliance. Please note the assessment dates. The blue bars are assessments made 70 days after treatment, which is quite considerable length of control. If I can get 2 months worth of good residual control out of a herbicide, I'd consider that money well spent. Well, these trials can go up to 132 days after treatment, which is essentially at least a third of a year. And looking at the levels of control, you are getting quite good levels of efficacy, between generally 80% to 95% with the first 3 herbicides, 4 herbicides on that table. Very exceptional. Beware that was probably done in a dry year. Very wet years, well, the efficacy may drop off pretty quickly, depending on the mode of action, how the herbicide sort of lasts in the environment. And that's another field of research or another talk that could go on for half an hour. So I won't have time for that. I'll move on to the next slide. Now, sorghum is probably the most commonly grown summer crop, and we have to occasionally, particularly in the eastern part of the northern region, I've seen sorghum grown quite well, almost at the tail end of the eradication program of barnyard grass. And you have to be very cautious. Sorghum you can use in various situations. Here, I would not recommend using a sorghum crop when you've got barnyard grass and it's pretty high weed infestations. Reminding you that we've got dual gold, excellent herbicide. My trials and others suggest in the initial phases, dual gold can give you the high 90% levels of control. It is a little bit more water soluble, so you get a moderate to shorter period of time generally, and then efficacy will drop off a little bit. You've also got the application of atrazine, and atrazine is not the best herbicide, but in combination with dual seems to be quite good. Atrazine at the very high rates by itself is really what is required, but in combination with dual it's quite good. So with sorghum, if you've got a light infestation of barnyard grass, it's maybe worth your while because you're getting very high levels of control on a very light population. But the problem exists with the odd plant that then does survive. What do you do with those? Michael just alluded to the fact that some plants can produce 40,000 seeds per plant. And the only other option, once you've got large plants in a sorghum crop, is then to try inter-row applications. So of the cultivation of herbicide to stop any weed blowouts. That will usually collect at least or control at least 70 to 80% of those plants over the whole field, but you can't get the intra-row barnyard grass plants. They either have to be manually chipped or left set seed. We've got sorghum, soybeans, mungbeans and peanuts. Now they are grown occasionally. We've done some work back about in 2010 where we had pretty good control. Very short season crop, for example mungbeans. The life cycle is very rapid and fast, which probably matches the barnyard grass, but the herbicides that you've got available complement the situation. Okay, you can aim for competition, as Michael said, which helps greatly with your weed control, but you've got the herbicides listed below, from trephland and pendimethalin, which is stomp, to dual and spinnaker, which are listed there. You've got 3 different modes of action, which all have residual ability. Then any application of a post-emergent herbicide will be limited to either a group A herbicide or inter-row cultivation if you choose to go wide row cropping. That would be highly efficacious and do wonders for driving down the seed bank. Roundup Ready cotton, big concerns with glyphosate resistant barnyard grass in these systems. I've talked to some of the people from Monsanto, and the stats are suggesting that people are starting to move into not a complete obsession with glyphosate application, but they're moving into some residuals. Most of the people are using at least some stomp or treflan. Occasionally they may even apply dual as a pre-emergent, just to take the pressure off the group M or glyphosate chemistry. Yet again, the competition is important once the cotton is up, but those herbicides I've just mentioned are used quite, or starting to be used quite widely in the cotton industry. In the American states, they had just used glyphosate until it fell over, whereas now they're unfortunately having to use about 6 or 7 or 8 different herbicide applications in their cotton. There's still the application of using a lay-by application of herbicides, so yet again you can use the pre-emergence down the rows to keep pressure off the weed numbers. What they're possibly trying to look at now is looking at, yet again, optical spray technology or hand shipping back to the old days, just to get rid of the few stray plants. Obviously, Group A herbicides is desirable, but we prefer that to be used in moderation and preferably before a parapod application in fallow, so we can reduce the selection pressure. Here we go. This is the list of herbicides we've got available over the whole situation. Now we've got glyphosate that's failing down the bottom. We've got one case of Group C resistance, which we haven't heard of anything else. So at the moment we're not doing too bad. We've still got a lot of options out there that when you look at this, you've got 1, 2, up to about 7 different modes of action available that are still working quite well. And they are either pre or post-emergent. So you've got options for that, you've got options for fallow, you've got options for cotton, options for broadleaf crops. So that's the current state of play, and things aren't too bad at the moment, but we've got to preserve what herbicides we've got by judicious use of these herbicides. Lastly, I'd like to just touch on just the basic rules of thumb. For barnyard grass pest management, clearly the first step is just to know that you've got resistance, and you can guess that you've got resistance. Sometimes in that survey that Michael mentioned that some people thought they had resistance but it came back as susceptible, and vice versa, that some might have thought they had no resistance and that came back as resistant. So need to be tested. Farm hygiene is another important issue. I've seen many a farm, particularly the one I've dealt with initially, where the patches emanate from the main paddock, and the patches sometimes were 3 to 4 paddocks away, and it may have been attributed to farm vehicle movement with a bit of mud or soil, and a whole range of other things, as Michael just said, such as flooding. We are looking at the life cycle gain, and the ecology drives the potential of eradication after that 3 years to 4 years maybe. As Michael said, the seed bank does persist a little bit, and you've always got to worry about the tail end seed bank, and you've got to kill those last few plants. I've mentioned crop rotation. Mungbean crops may be useful. Sorghum, be careful of, be just aware of those few plants that go down the intra-row area. Crop competition does drive the herbicide longevity, so you need it in combination with herbicides. Double knocks has been used for many a year and quite successfully. So far, no blowouts in terms of resistance. It contains resistance and also prevents even the susceptible populations from getting resistant to a certain degree. There's more work done on the residuals. Chemical companies will be hopefully putting more registrations out in the near future, in the next 5 years, so there's something to look forward to there. And if you're using knockdowns, which we will ultimately still have to do, We're always still changing our mindset from treating large weeds with glyphosate to treating small weeds with either glyphosate or something else. But do not let anything set seed. Plan to double knock the bad paddocks, clearly, and avoid cultivation where possible, but this may sort of trigger questions from the audience here that what do you do with plants that are quite large, that have reached massive proportions, and you've had a flood and you couldn't get onto the paddock. Well, that might be a discussion point for later on. I thank everyone for their participation. I'll hand it back over to Mark.